The Wild West, a land of lawless outlaws, dusty saloons, and standoffs at high noon. But even in this chaotic, larger-than-life world, there was one man who seemed to thrive on chaos itself. His name? Jim Miller. You might not know him as well as Billy the Kid or Jesse James, but trust me, Miller was in a league of his own. Known as Killer Millers or Deacon Jim, this guy wasn't your average outlaw. He was more like a walking contradiction, a cold-blooded killer with the appearance of a well-dressed, Bible-toting churchgoer. But beneath that polished exterior, well, let's just say he wasn't auditioning for a spot on the choir. The beginning of a wild story. Now, let's start at the beginning. Jim Miller was born in 1861 in Van Buren, Arkansas, but his family moved to Texas when he was just a kid. You know what they say about Texas, right? Everything's bigger. Well, in Miller's case, that included his ambitions and his body count. But it wasn't all shootouts and holdups at first. No, young Jim had a pretty rough upbringing. By age 8, both his parents were dead. Classic Wild West orphan origin story, right? Except instead of becoming a masked vigilante like Batman, Miller decided that taking lives was a lot more profitable than saving them. By his teenage years, Jim was already proving to be a bit off. And by off, I mean this guy was seriously bad news. He was known to be cold and calculating even as a young man. The first real hint of what kind of person Miller would become happened when he was only 19. In 1880, he killed his grandparents. Yeah, not exactly your typical rebellious teenage phase. The details are murky, but it was suspected that he did the dirty deed because they refused to let him live with them. That's right, folks, killing for real estate before it was trendy. But here's the kicker, he got off scot-free. Apparently, lack of evidence was enough to keep him from swinging from a noose, and so Jim Miller walked free. If this were a movie, this is where the audience collectively gasps. But in the Wild West, that's just another Tuesday. The preacher who packed a punch. Now, Jim Miller wasn't the kind of outlaw who was always on the run, living rough in the hills. Oh no, this guy had flair. He had style. And nothing said style in the late 19th century like walking around in a dark frock coat with a Bible tucked under your arm, all while hiding the fact that you're an assassin for hire. Miller was known for being impeccably dressed, always clean cut, and get this, he didn't smoke, drink, or swear. He was the picture of piety, if you ignored the fact that he was one of the most feared hitmen of his time. And yeah, that whole Deacon Jim nickname, that wasn't a joke. He really was a devout churchgoer, a hitman who read the Bible between jobs. Go figure. It's almost like he thought if he showed up to enough Sunday services, God would overlook the fact that he was taking out half of Texas. Miller's deadly business model. So how does a Bible-thumping dandy get into the business of killing for cash? Simple. It pays well, and Jim liked money almost as much as he liked not getting caught. Miller worked as a hired gun for anyone willing to pay, and in the Wild West, business was booming. His clients ranged from ranchers and businessmen to rival lawmen looking to settle scores. And if you needed someone gone, Miller was your guy. Just don't expect him to leave any witnesses, or, survivors in general. One of Miller's most notorious hits was in 1896, when he was hired to kill a man named Bud Fraser. Now, Fraser wasn't just any guy. He was a sheriff. That's right. This wasn't just your average hit job. This was Wild West politics at its finest. Miller had already had a bit of history with Fraser. They'd clashed over some ranching disputes, and Fraser had even shot Miller at one point. But Miller had survived, thanks to his trusty bulletproof vest. Yeah, Miller wore a bulletproof vest. Talk about being ahead of your time. So naturally, Miller wanted revenge. He cornered Fraser in a blacksmith shop and gunned him down in cold blood. Fraser didn't stand a chance. Of course, Miller was arrested for the murder, but this is where things get interesting. You see, Jim Miller had a knack for escaping justice. And by knack, I mean, he had a lot of powerful friends and bribed juries. Despite being as guilty as sin, Miller was acquitted. Again. It was almost like he had 9 lives, or maybe just a very, very good lawyer. Killer in a frock coat. As the years went by, Jim Miller's reputation as a deadly gun for hire only grew. He became infamous for his ruthless efficiency. Unlike other outlaws who might get sloppy or let their emotions get in the way, Miller was all business. He was known for ambushing his targets, often shooting them in the back. No honor among thieves for this guy. In fact, one of his signature moves was to invite his victims to pray before he shot them. Yeah, if that doesn't send a shiver down your spine, I don't know what will. But it wasn't just individuals Miller went after. He was believed to be behind several high-profile assassinations, including the killing of lawman Pat Garrett. Yes, that Pat Garrett, the guy who took down Billy the Kid. Miller was suspected of orchestrating Garrett's murder, but like most things in Miller's life, the details were murky and nothing could be proven. If Jim Miller had a motto, it was probably something like, "If you can't prove it, it didn't happen." The secrets behind the smile. For a man so tied to death, Jim Miller had an unusual demeanor. His smile, calm and collected, was as much a signature as the frock coat he wore or the ambush tactics he employed. Witnesses described him as unnervingly cheerful, even in the face of danger. And it wasn't just an outward projection. He was known for walking into dangerous situations with an air of cool confidence, as if he was untouchable. The fact that Miller spent years as a free man, despite his long list of victims, probably reinforced that attitude. Miller was also rumored to have a macabre sense of humor. Imagine it. Right before pulling the trigger, he'd crack a joke or offer a prayer. Some said he took a special kind of satisfaction in watching his victims squirm, offering them a final moment of reflection before sending them to meet their maker. The chilling part? He never lost that calm, serene expression. It's almost as if killing was just another day at the office for Jim Miller, except the office was the entire Wild West, and business was always booming. His almost supernatural ability to avoid consequences only added to his legend. Even when cornered, Miller would flash that knowing grin as if to say, "I'll get out of this one too." And more often than not, he was right. This combination of charm, ruthlessness, and seeming invincibility made Jim Miller more than just a killer. He was a terrifying enigma. The final job. When luck runs out. For a while, Miller's luck seemed like it would never run out. He was feared, he was respected, and he was practically untouchable. But like all good Wild West stories, this one had to come to an end. And oh, what an end it was. In 1909, Jim Miller took on what would be his final job. He was hired to kill a former U.S. Marshal named Alan Gus Bobbitt in Oklahoma. Now here's the thing about Jim Miller. He didn't do anything halfway. When he took out Bobbitt, he did it with his usual flair, ambushing him and shooting him twice with a shotgun. Bobbitt's family, however, was not going to let this slide. They knew Miller was behind the hit, and this time they were determined to bring him to justice. Miller was arrested and thrown in jail, but remember, this guy was like Houdini when it came to escaping the noose. He'd been acquitted before, and he probably thought he could buy his way out of this one too. But Bobbitt's friends and family had other plans. A lynch mob formed, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. Miller, along with 3 other men, was dragged from his cell in Ada, Oklahoma, and taken to a barn. Now, here's where Miller's story takes a turn from wild to downright bizarre. As the noose was placed around his neck, Miller reportedly said, "Let the record show I died with my boots on." Classic. Even in his final moments, Jim Miller was playing the part of the outlaw to the hilt. And with that, he was hanged alongside his accomplices. No trial, no jury, just a swift end to a man who had escaped justice one too many times. The legacy of Jim Miller. And that, my friends, is the story of Jim Miller, a man who lived as a walking contradiction. He was a cold-blooded killer who dressed like a preacher, a man who was feared by all but managed to evade the law at almost every turn. In the end, it wasn't a shootout that brought him down, but a lynch mob tired of seeing him slip through the cracks of justice. The Wild West may have been full of larger-than-life characters, but Jim Miller stands out as one of the most chilling. A man who smiled, prayed, and killed, all in the same breath. So, next time you hear about the infamous outlaws of the Wild West, don't forget Jim Miller. He may not have the Hollywood fame of some of his contemporaries, but his story is every bit as wild, twisted, and legendary.